Hi folks, I thought we'd maybe do a video more on the kind of habitat, countryside management aspect of things, to kind of kick off that series, which I'll keep kind of updated as best I can throughout the season, giving you an idea of what kind of goes on into the habitat management aspect of my life and my job. So this video is, as you will guess from the title, going to be all about giant hogweed. Not a nice plant. I'm sure most people have probably heard of giant hogweed, whether you would actually recognise it or not, and some people may and some people wouldn't, so we'll have a look at some shortly. But just while I'm at the workshop, before we head out into the woods, we'll just have a look at some of the tools that we use to control it. Now, the reasons that hogweed needs controlled are, there's two or three reasons. One, it's an invasive species, it's not native to this country, it was brought here by the Victorians to kind of make their walled gardens look grand, because it was a very impressive plant. It grows to 8-9 feet in height, 10 feet sometimes. Big, thick stems, that kind of thickness. And it's crowned in, later in the summer, it becomes crowned in a kind of a corona of lovely, very, very small, very delicate white flowers. But you, from my point of view, you do not want them to get to that stage. If they get to that stage, they'll seed and start the whole hellish process all over again. So invasive species, number one reason it grows. So once it gets established, it becomes very, very thick and very dominating. So it chokes out a lot of other native stuff. But the big big thing about it is that it can potentially actually be really quite dangerous. It's not a nice plant. It's a plant that has quite a dangerous sap. So what the sap will do if you get it on your skin is it will remove your skin's natural protection to UV light rays, and you end up with horrendous sunburn. If you have a look on Google Images, you can find pictures of some really, really nasty looking injuries caused by giant hogweed sap. Another thing we'll have a look at as we go today is the structure of the plant. That also makes it quite dangerous. It has a hollow stem, and where you have lots of hogweed around areas where perhaps you might have children walking, it's not uncommon, I believe, for children to break the stems, realising that there's these hollow thick stems, and use them, as children would, as pea shooters for blowguns. And that's not going to have a pleasant result. So if you do get hogweed sap on yourself, the thing to do is to first of all wash it, scrub it immediately, get into the water and get it scrubbed immediately, and then keep it covered, keep the area covered. It doesn't even need to be a particularly sunny day for it to have an effect. I've had kind of minor splashes on me when I've been treating hogweed before, as have some people who have been helping me, and it doesn't need to be particularly sunny for it to have an effect. If it's not particularly sunny, it won't be a sunburn as such, but you will end up with like a sunspot or almost like a mole that will stay there for a significant length of time. So it's not something that we want to have around. It's something that needs to be controlled, and it's something that I spend an inordinate amount of time. From this time of year, we're at the end of April now, the hogweed is, although it's not a head height yet, it's already kind of knee height, thigh height, some of it. The leaves are this kind of size, some of them, and it's really pushing through. So from this time of year right through to the back end of the season, kind of September, October, it can be, it takes up an awful lot of time. We're very fortunate here. We have some really good volunteer help and some very good coordination in the past 4 or 5 years from the Scottish Invasive Species Initiative, and their officers are really good at getting boots on the ground, getting volunteer help and getting people trained up to deal with this stuff. So this is some of the equipment that used to deal with it. This obviously is your knapsack sprayer. This isn't something which I, strangely enough, use so much. This is kind of the standard weapon for treating giant hogweed. In my time here managing this piece of ground, I have done an incredible amount of spraying with herbicide from one of these things. I decided a couple of years ago that I wasn't willing to keep using that to the same degree which I had been previously, and that was basically, from a health point of view, the Roundup spray, it's a specially formulated Roundup spray that we use to kill hogweed. It is marketed and labelled as being entirely benign and completely safe for use around any species of mammal, which obviously includes us. I never quite believed that, and when you're in a situation where you have so much hogweed that you're operating in a literal forest of the stuff, it's up to your shoulder height, sometimes higher than that, you cannot avoid, if you're using one of these things, you cannot avoid having a huge amount of spray vapor surrounding you constantly. And what you do with the spray is you add a blue dye to it, and that helps you to see which leaves you've sprayed and which you haven't. And you'll come out of the woods absolutely covered in a fine mist of blue dye, and that shows you obviously how much spray is getting back onto your clothes. And I was never comfortable with it, and having done some more research on the stuff for myself, I found that it indeed does not seem to be as safe as it is cracked up to be. So I thought, well, I'm not willing to continue with that. So I'll use that for spot spraying now, but not for doing really thick stuff. Other thing that's quite useful for applying poison is the injector gun here. So this attaches with a hose to this bottle here, in which you put the chemical, and you literally punch that into the stem, give it 2 or 3 pumps, and then you've injected the plant, and that is quite a useful thing as well, particularly later in the season when the stems are really thick. So the 2 tools that I tend to use most in treating and controlling giant hogweed are the 2 bladed tools here. This is a tool which I had custom made up. I had this blade custom made up by a local blacksmith, and I just attached it to an aluminium bowl here. And this is a really good tool. What you can do with this is you can get this into the ground underneath the root of the hogweed, and you can cut the root deep underground. Now, although you will sometimes get secondary growth coming out of that same root, and you're not obviously putting poison into it and killing the plant from the root, as long as you can stop that plant from seeding that year, you're doing exactly the same thing. Because if you aren't letting those seeds get into the ground, then that plant is not going to come back next year. So in some ways that seems like a more labour intensive way of doing things, but in other ways there's a flip side to that as well, you know. And in other ways you're obviously not dealing with harmful chemicals, and you're not carrying one of these knapsack sprayers full of 20 litres of spray through the woods on a muggy July day sometimes, when it is, you know, you could easily go through half a dozen of these spray packs a day. So you could easily have, you know, 6 20-litre spray packs emptied dealing with giant hogweed. That's how thick it gets, and doing that on a hot, sticky, or a hot, dry July day even, it's not any fun. So from that perspective, this is actually a lot less work, and it's much nicer to walk around the woods carrying one of these things. What I would never do with this is use it to, which is quite tempting, to slice the stem like that, because then you will get a spray of a splash of sap coming out of the plant, and obviously that's going to be quite harmful. The old-fashioned medieval bill hook here, again, does much the same thing. It's got quite a shorter haft on it, but it's a good heavy blade, and you can use that for doing much the same thing. So the two hooks are the things that I use most often, and I've had people tell me that that's a crazy approach to doing the giant hogweed, but in the time that I've been primarily using these over these, I've actually personally not seen any increase in the hogweed. It keeps coming back. The other thing about hogweed is that the seeds can lie dormant in the ground for, I think it's about 7 years, so you've got a massive seed bank built up over years and years and years, and obviously not all those seeds are going to come in the same year, so it's a constant battle, and I don't know, maybe one day we'll get to the stage where it's just not coming through anymore, but it is quite impossible to get every plant every year, so you're always going to have some getting reseeded into the ground, and let's see, you've got that kind of 7-year cycle of seed bank built up in the ground, so that's going to take a huge amount of work to get on top of. We are getting slowly on top of it to an extent, I think. I certainly think in the time that we've had help from the Scottish Invasive Species Initiative, they have done a massive amount in terms of, as I said before, getting boots on the ground, volunteer help. And when you can have a team of 2 or 3 guys coming through the wood in a line, sweeping through a section of ground or a section of woodland, it makes it much easier not to miss any, or to miss fewer plants than if you're doing that yourself, because what will happen is you'll start picking a line, and you'll say, I'm going to follow this line, and then you'll see a bit off to your side and go, I'll just get that bit, and then, oh, I'll just get that bit, and before you know it, you're completely away off through the wood, and it becomes impossible to know what you've sprayed and what you've not. Even with the blue dye, it can be quite hard to see, and it dries in very quickly. So yeah, that's the equipment. So what we'll do is we'll go and take a walk through the woods, and I'll show you some hogweed and how we deal with it. And what we'll do is later in the year we'll probably do a part 2 on this little video, and I'll be able to show you how it develops throughout the year, because it's definitely not going to all get cut before it gets high. There's just far too much of it. Okay. Okay, here we are, folks. This is it. This is the stuff. This is Heracleum mantagasianum. That's the giant hogweed. As we say, not native to this country. It has its native range around about, around about the Black Sea, Ukraine, the Caucasus, that kind of area. In fact, during the summertime, one of the guys that sometimes helps here sent me a video, a drone video of Ukrainian troops attacking a Russian trench, and what were they attacking through? And it was plain as day on the drone footage, was a field of giant hogweed. That's quite interesting. So this is the stuff. It's very distinctive. There's not really anything else you can mistake giant hogweed for. Potentially common hogweed, which is not harmful like giant hogweed is, but it's quite distinctive. The giant hogweed is quite distinctive. One, the size of it. Now, so here's my hand compared to this one leaf. Now I'm going to touch this very carefully. Okay, so that leaf has still got a lot of growing to do, and that's why it's called giant hogweed. You can always tell this kind of unpleasant, kind of bristly, red, purpley, blotchy stem. That is giant hogweed. There's not really anything you can mistake that for. With these big dish kind of shaped, jagged deep green leaves and this blotchy hairy stem, there's nothing that you can mistake that for. Now, I was telling you how thick this stuff grows, so we are right now looking at one plant coming out of one root system. So you can see this here. So you've got 1, 2, 3 trunks coming out of that root system, and this bit that's coming spearing straight up out the middle, that's going to end up being the flower head. Okay, but that is all, that's one plant. Now, how many plants are in this little kind of meter squared section here? Then, if we turn around, this woodland floor is literally a carpet of giant hogweed in plants of various stages of growth. So you've got some really little ones down here, and you've got the big ones that we just looked at. All around here, this is all hogweed. All the way through here. Finn doesn't care, he's quite happy. All the way through here, it is a carpet, a blanket of giant hogweed. So I deliberately brought you into this area of the state because this is always a bad bit. And as I was saying earlier, I would, it would be interesting for me to know how many litres of spray I have sprayed into just this little area that we're walking through alone here in the past kind of 10 years of me being responsible for this bit of ground. It is, it's a vast problem. It's a really, really big problem. You can see there's some plants in a bigger stage of growth there. So those plants are about knee height, and they are already, they're a couple of inches thick around the stem there. So we'll go back and we'll get the tool, and we'll chop one of these and show you the structure of the plant that I was telling you about, which is one of the things that makes it potentially quite dangerous. So we'll very carefully cut this. Okay, and there you can see that hollow stem. Now, the other interesting thing about hogweed, I'll pick this up so you can see. So you've got that hollow stem there, which is one of the things that has in the past has been known for making it dangerous, as I say, with kids trying to use it for blowguns and pea shooters, especially when it's about this stage of growth. One of the other interesting things about hogweed is that it has a very, very strong, very distinctive smell, much stronger than most other plants. There's not an easy way to describe it. It's just a very, very strong smell. Slightly fruity perhaps, but not in a pleasant way. It's just got a really strong kind of, I suppose you could say it was very slightly rhubarby in smell, but it's not the same as rhubarb. It's just a really strong kind of acrid smell. And if I've been chopping a lot of it, when I take this back to the shed, I can actually smell it off of the blade of this. It really does stick to things. So with this blade, what I can do is I can get, quite difficult to do without two hands, but I can get that deep into the ground underneath that root, and I can cut that root deep. So you're getting a good way down there. So that plant has got a long way to go to get back up to that stage. Now, if you can do a fair bit of that at this time of year, then you're going to go quite a long way towards preventing reseeding. Now, this bit in here will get sprayed at this time of year, at least. Although it's so thick, at least you can be sure that the spray is kind of going down to ground level. It's not going to be up around your face and above kind of waist height or shoulder height. So next time we get a dry day, this bit in here will get sprayed, because there's no way that you're going to be coming through here and cutting every single one of these plants with the hook here. You can do some of them, but do the bigger ones perhaps, but you're not going to get them all. And again, there you can see how much of that root we've taken out there. And as long as we're stopping the thing from reseeding, then as far as this year is concerned, that's the job done. But it is a massive amount of work. And I will bring you back in here
later in the season. I'll spray all this, but there will still be new growth coming through underneath all this. So just because all of these might get chopped or sprayed now doesn't mean that in 3 weeks' time you're not going to have another load of fresh growth coming through the soil, because remember, you've got that 7-year life cycle in the seed bank. So it's a big job. It's a big job. So we'll bring you in here later in the season and show you a little bit more of what it looks like once it gets to a more mature stage. And I'm just going to chop this one while we're here, because that'll be a satisfying one to do because it's so big. But I say not easy to do with the camera in one hand. There we go. So the one thing that you must never cut like this, which often grows alongside giant hogweed and needs controlled also, is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is very invasive, and it can become a big problem. In this area, we do have a little bit of it, but it's quite self-contained. Basically, the rule is don't cut it. Knotweed can seed from a tiny fragment of the stem, so if you go and strim a patch of Japanese knotweed, you've just created 100-fold times of a problem for yourself. But this approach with hogweed doesn't do any harm whatsoever. So there it is. Vile, horrible stuff.